I have watched defendants bring documents, receipts, photographs, witnesses, and lies into my courtroom, but I never expected a woman to walk in holding a cat carrier and claim the animal inside was the evidence that would destroy her neighbor. Before we begin this case, make sure you subscribe to this channel for more highly emotional, shocking, and unforgettable courtroom stories like this one. And comment below where you are watching this video from, because I love seeing viewers from all around the world. Now let's begin. The case began on a rainy Wednesday morning, the kind of morning when everyone enters court slightly irritated before the first word is even spoken. The gallery was full. The air smelled faintly of wet coats, paper files, and coffee from the hallway. My clerk handed me the case folder, and I remember pausing when I read the title, Marlene Whitaker versus Olivia Bennett. At first glance, it looked like a neighborhood dispute. Those are common, too common. A fence line, a barking dog, a tree branch, a parking space, a package left at the wrong door. People often underestimate how quickly small neighborhood disagreements become personal wars. I have seen grown adults spend thousands of dollars fighting over something that could have been solved with one calm conversation on a porch. But this file was different. The plaintiff, Marlene Whitaker, was suing her neighbor for emotional distress, property invasion, surveillance, harassment, and destruction of privacy. She demanded $10,000. And the centerpiece of her claim was not a camera, not a broken window, not a threatening letter, a cat. Marlene claimed her neighbor's orange tabby cat had been trained to spy on her. I read that line twice. Then I looked up. That was when Marlene Whitaker entered my courtroom. She was a heavy-set woman in her late 40s, dressed in a bright purple blouse, black pants, and large gold earrings that moved every time she turned her head. She walked with the confidence of someone who had already tried this argument on friends, family, police officers, and strangers at the grocery store, and had decided that anyone who did not believe her was part of the problem. In one hand, she carried a thick folder stuffed with printed photographs. In the other, she held a plastic cat carrier. Inside the carrier sat an orange tabby cat with white paws, wide eyes, and absolutely no understanding that he had just been accused of espionage in a United States courtroom. Across from her stood Olivia Bennett, 32 years old, a quiet elementary school teacher with dark brown hair pulled into a low bun. She wore a navy cardigan and held herself the way many innocent people do when they are forced to defend themselves against something absurd. Not angry, not amused. Just tired. Beside Olivia sat her husband, Mark Bennett, a paramedic. He had the posture of someone used to emergencies, but even he looked uncomfortable. His eyes kept moving between Marlene and the cat carrier, as if he still could not believe this case had reached a courtroom. The cat's name, according to the file, was Pumpkin. Pumpkin had lived with the Bennetts for 5 years. Marlene claimed Pumpkin was not an ordinary pet. She claimed Pumpkin had been sent onto her property repeatedly to gather information, watch her through windows, and deliver evidence back to Olivia Bennett. Now, I want you to understand something. A judge must remain serious, even when a claim sounds ridiculous. Every person deserves to be heard. Sometimes what looks absurd on paper has a painful truth underneath it. Fear can make people sound irrational. Stress can make people interpret ordinary things as threats, and neighbors can be cruel in quiet ways that are hard to prove. So I did not laugh. No one in my courtroom laughed, but I noticed the gallery leaning forward. They knew this case was either going to become nonsense very quickly or reveal something much stranger underneath. Marlene placed the cat carrier on the floor beside her table and immediately pointed at Olivia. That woman has been using that cat to invade my privacy for months, she said. And today, I am finally going to prove it. Olivia closed her eyes for a moment, not from guilt, from exhaustion. That reaction mattered to me. People who are lying often watch the judge carefully, trying to measure whether the lie is working. Olivia did not look like she was performing innocence. She looked like someone who had been living inside another person's obsession for far too long. I asked Marlene to begin with the facts. Facts are important, not feelings first, not conclusions, not accusations, facts. She opened her folder and pulled out several printed photographs. My bailiff brought them to me. The first photograph showed Pumpkin sitting on a wooden fence between the two houses. The second showed Pumpkin lying in Marlene's flower bed. The third showed Pumpkin near a kitchen window. The fourth showed Pumpkin looking directly toward the camera with the blank, judgmental expression cats often have when they are simply existing. Marlene said, "You see that? He's watching me." I looked at the photograph. The cat was sitting on a fence. I asked, "What exactly do you believe this photograph proves?" "It proves he was positioned there." "By whom?" "By her." She pointed at Olivia again. Olivia shook her head slightly, but said nothing. That restraint interested me. Many people, when falsely accused, interrupt too quickly. Olivia did not. She waited. She let Marlene speak. That usually means one of two things. Either the person is very controlled or they know the other side will eventually expose themselves. Marlene continued. She said Pumpkin appeared every time she was doing something private. When she drank coffee in her backyard, when she watered her plants, when she spoke on the phone near her window, when delivery packages arrived, when she argued with her sister on the porch. At first, Marlene said, "I thought it was just a cat. Then I realized the pattern." That word always catches my attention. People love patterns. Human beings are built to find them. Sometimes patterns reveal truth. Other times they reveal fear. A judge must learn the difference. I asked Marlene what she believed Olivia was trying to discover. She said, "My personal routine." "For what purpose?" "To harass me." "How?" Marlene paused. The pause was small but important. She had a conclusion, but not a bridge leading to it. Finally, she said, "So she could report me to the homeowners association." At that, Olivia looked up. That was the first time her expression changed. I noticed it immediately. There was history there. I asked Olivia if there had been prior issues with the homeowners association. Before Olivia could answer, Marlene snapped, "She has been obsessed with my property since the day I moved in." That told me something. People who interrupt a question directed at the other party are often afraid of the answer. I told Marlene to let Olivia speak. Olivia took a slow breath and explained that Marlene had moved into the neighborhood 8 months earlier. At first, things were cordial. They waved from their driveways. Olivia brought over banana bread. Mark helped Marlene move a heavy planter from her garage to the front porch. Then, according to Olivia, complaints began. Marlene complained that Olivia's porch light was too bright. Then that Mark's truck was too loud when he left for early shifts. Then that children walking to the bus stop stepped too close to her lawn. Then that Pumpkin crossed the fence. Olivia said they tried to be polite. They changed the porch bulb. Mark parked farther down the driveway. They apologized for Pumpkin wandering, even though Marlene's own yard had bird feeders, open flower beds, and a warm porch that attracted every animal in the neighborhood. Marlene interrupted again. That cat came because she trained him. I looked at Pumpkin. Pumpkin had fallen asleep. That was not legal analysis, of course, but I will admit the contrast was memorable. A woman was accusing the cat of being a surveillance tool, and the alleged spy was asleep with one paw pressed against the carrier door. I asked Marlene whether she had any evidence that Olivia trained Pumpkin to enter her yard. She smiled, not a nervous smile, a victorious smile. "Yes," she said, "I have video." The courtroom shifted. Video changes everything. Photographs can be interpreted. Stories can be exaggerated, but video, if clear and complete, can show the flow of a moment in a way testimony cannot. I asked her to submit it. My clerk prepared the monitor. Marlene stood taller. Olivia looked confused. Mark Bennett leaned toward his wife and whispered something. She shook her head as if she had no idea what was coming. The first video appeared on the screen. It was filmed from inside Marlene's home through a window. The camera was shaky. The blinds were partly visible. Outside, Pumpkin walked along the fence, jumped down into Marlene's yard, and sniffed near a row of flowers. Marlene's voice could be heard behind the camera. There he is again. Look at him, looking for evidence. In the video, Pumpkin sniffed a flower pot. Then he rolled over on the grass. The gallery remained silent, but I could feel people fighting reactions. I asked Marlene, "Where is the surveillance activity?" She pointed at the screen. "He's searching. For what? My secrets." It is difficult to keep a courtroom serious when someone says a sentence like that. But my job is not to mock people. My job is to separate fear from fact. So I asked a different question. Ems Whitaker, what secrets do you believe the cat could retrieve from your flower bed? She looked offended. That is not the point. It usually is. When a person cannot explain the mechanism of their accusation, the accusation often rests on emotion rather than evidence. But then Marlene produced another video. This one was different. It showed Pumpkin sitting outside Marlene's back window at night. His face was close to the glass. His eyes reflected the camera flash, glowing bright green in the darkness. Marlene's voice on the recording whispered, "He's watching me again." Behind the glass, faintly, the sound of a television could be heard. A lamp was on. Pumpkin tapped the window once with his paw. Marlene paused the video and said, "That is not normal." Now, I will be honest with you, the image was unsettling, not because I believed the cat was spying, but because I could understand how a lonely, anxious person, already angry at a neighbor, might begin to feel watched. Fear can turn ordinary events into confirmation. The mind takes a cat at a window and builds a conspiracy around it. But law requires more than discomfort. I asked Olivia why Pumpkin might approach Marlene's window. Olivia looked embarrassed. "Your Honor, she feeds him." The courtroom shifted again. Marlene's mouth opened. Olivia continued. "She started leaving tuna outside because she said she felt bad for him. Then, when he kept coming back, she said we were sending him." I turned to Marlene. "Did you feed the cat?" Marlene looked away. That was enough to tell me the answer before she spoke. "I may have put food out once or twice." Olivia said, "Every day for 3 weeks." Marlene snapped, "Because he looked hungry." Mark Bennett finally spoke. "Your Honor, Pumpkin weighs 16 pounds. The gallery almost broke. I raised my hand before laughter could spread, but inside I understood something important. Marlene had created the condition she was now calling harassment. She fed the cat returned, and then she interpreted the return as proof of Olivia's control. That is not evidence. That is a loop. And human beings get trapped in loops all the time. Still, the case had not reached its strangest point yet, because Marlene then reached into her folder and pulled out a small plastic bag. Inside the bag was a tiny black object. She held it up like a detective revealing the murder weapon. "This," she said, "is what I found under his collar." Olivia's face changed. Mark sat upright. Even I leaned forward, because for the first time, Marlene had produced something that might actually matter. A device, small, black, rectangular. The courtroom went quiet. Marlene looked at me with triumph in her eyes and said, "That is a recording device. That cat was evidence, and now I can prove my neighbor has been spying on me." I looked at the object, then at Olivia Bennett, then at Pumpkin, still sleeping in the carrier. And for the first time that morning, I realized this ridiculous case might be hiding a very real crime. The moment Marlene Whitaker lifted that tiny black object in the plastic bag, the courtroom changed. Before that, people had been quietly struggling not to react. A cat accused of espionage sounds almost impossible to take seriously. Even I understood how strange it felt. But when an actual device appeared in her hand, small enough to fit under a collar, dark enough to look intentional, the room stopped thinking about an eccentric neighbor dispute. Now everyone was thinking the same thing. What if she was right? That is one of the dangerous things about courtrooms. A case can look absurd for 20 minutes, and then one object can make every person question their first impression. That is why a judge cannot afford arrogance. You must listen even when the claim sounds ridiculous. You must examine even when the allegation seems impossible. Because sometimes the truth is hiding behind the very detail everyone wanted to laugh at. Marlene saw the shift immediately. Her shoulders lifted. Her chin rose. Her eyes moved across the gallery as if she had just won the trial. She liked that moment. I could see it. She liked watching doubt enter the faces of the people who had not believed her. Olivia Bennett did not look victorious. She looked confused. Her husband, Mark, leaned forward, staring at the plastic bag as if he were trying to recognize the object from across the room. Pumpkin, the accused cat, continued sleeping inside the carrier with the deep commitment of an animal untouched by human drama. I asked Marlene where she found it. Under his collar, she said. When? 3 nights ago. Where was the cat? In my backyard. How did you get close enough to remove it? That question slowed her down. She blinked once, then said, he came to me. Olivia immediately looked up. That's because you feed him. Marlene snapped. I fed him because I was trying to catch him. There it was again, a shifting explanation. First she fed him because he looked hungry. Now she fed him because she was trying to catch him. In court, changed explanations do not always mean someone is lying, but they always deserve attention. Truth usually has a stable spine. Lies often bend depending on what question is asked. I told Olivia not to interrupt and asked Marlene to continue. She said Pumpkin entered her backyard through a gap near the fence, as he had done many times before. She had placed a bowl of tuna near the patio door. When Pumpkin came close, she noticed something under the collar. She claimed she gently removed the collar, found the small black device taped beneath it, and immediately knew Olivia had been using the cat to record her. Immediately knew, I repeated. Yes, that phrase bothered me. People who discover suspicious things usually experience confusion first. They ask, what is this? Where did it come from? Is this dangerous? Could it be something else? But Marlene claimed certainty from the first second. Certainty can be honest. It can also be prejudice wearing a suit. I asked the bailiff to bring the plastic bag to the clerk. The object was placed on the evidence table. My clerk photographed it and read the marking on the side. It had no brand name, no visible button, no screen, no microphone hole that we could see from a distance. Just a small black rectangular casing with a faint seam along one edge. Marlene watched us examine it with impatience. That's a recorder, she said. I looked it up. I asked, you opened it? No. You tested it? No. You took it to the police? She hesitated. I called them. And? They said it was a civil matter. Olivia let out a breath, but I noticed Mark did not relax. That interested me. Mark Bennett's expression had changed from disbelief to concern. Not guilt, not fear, but concern. His eyes were fixed on the object in a very particular way. He seemed to recognize the possibility that this was not a recording device, but he did not dismiss it casually either. I asked Mark if he knew what it was. Before he could answer, Marlene pointed at him. Of course he knows. He helped her. Mark's jaw tightened. Your Honor, I'm a paramedic. I don't spy on my neighbor with a cat. Again, the courtroom almost broke. And again, I stopped it before laughter could take over, because I did not want Marlene humiliated. Not yet. Humiliation creates defensiveness, and defensiveness buries truth. If she was wrong, I needed to show it through evidence. If she was right, I needed to find out how far this went. I asked Mark again, calmly, whether he recognized the object. He said, "It looks like a tracker housing, maybe from a cheap pet GPS tag, but I'm not sure from here." Olivia turned toward him, surprised. "We don't have a GPS tag on Pumpkin," she said. That was the first moment Olivia looked uncertain. Marlene noticed it like a predator noticing movement. "You see," she said, "she didn't even know her husband put it there." Mark shook his head. "I didn't put anything on the cat. I watched both of them carefully. Marriages reveal themselves in court in small flashes. A glance, a hesitation. A silent question exchanged between two people who know each other well." Olivia looked confused, but not betrayed. Mark looked irritated, but not frightened. If there was a conspiracy between them, they were either excellent actors or this object had entered the case from somewhere else. I asked Olivia to describe Pumpkin's collar. She said it was a blue breakaway collar with a silver bell and a small tag with their phone number. Nothing else. No tracker. No device. She said Pumpkin was mostly indoor, but he sometimes slipped out through the back door or wandered between yards when Mark worked in the garage. Marlene laughed sharply. "Mostly indoor?" "He has been in my yard almost every day." Olivia looked at her and said, "Because you kept feeding him tuna." The repetition mattered. Olivia returned to the same explanation every time. Stable, simple, consistent. Marlene's story had already shifted, but the black object still sat on the evidence table. And evidence, even questionable evidence, must be examined. I asked the clerk to contact a courthouse technician. While we waited, I questioned Marlene about her history with Olivia. That is where the case began to show its deeper roots. Marlene had moved into the neighborhood 8 months earlier, after what she described as a difficult divorce and a fresh start. She bought a small house next to the Bennetts. At first, she said Olivia was friendly, too friendly, in her words. She said Olivia brought banana bread, offered trash pickup reminders, and introduced her to neighbors. I asked why that bothered her. Marlene said, "People are only that nice when they want information." That answer stayed with me. Paranoia often begins where trust has been damaged. I did not know the details of Marlene's divorce, and it was not my job to diagnose her. But I could hear the worldview beneath her testimony. Kindness to her was suspicious. A cat in the yard was surveillance. A neighbor's smile was strategy. A homeowners association letter was an attack. Still, pain does not give someone permission to invent crimes. Olivia explained that she had tried to welcome Marlene because the neighborhood was generally close. People watched each other's homes during vacations. Children played near the cul-de-sac. Neighbors exchanged packages. But Marlene began accusing people of watching her within the first month. First, she claimed the mail carrier was reading her envelopes. Then she claimed children waiting for the school bus were reporting her schedule. Then she complained that Mark's ambulance uniform was intimidating when he came home from work. Mark looked embarrassed when that was said aloud. I asked Marlene if those complaints were true. She said, "I have a right to privacy." That was not an answer. A right to privacy is real. A right to treat everyone around you as a spy is not. The technician arrived and examined the black object without opening it destructively. He looked at the casing, checked for ports, weighed it in his hand, then asked if he could remove the outer shell. I allowed it. Marlene stood straighter, ready for vindication. Olivia folded her hands. Mark watched closely. The technician opened the casing with a small tool. Inside was not a microphone, not a recorder, not a transmitter. It was a dead plastic shell with a tiny magnet and no working electronics. The courtroom became silent again, but this silence had a different shape. Marlene's eyes narrowed. That's impossible. The technician explained that it looked like part of a decorative magnetic collar charm, the kind sometimes used for pet doors or cheap accessories. It was not capable of recording sound. It had no battery, no storage, no wireless component, no microphone. Marlene shook her head. No. She removed the parts. Olivia stared at her. Mark closed his eyes briefly. I asked Marlene who she meant by she. Olivia, she said. How would Olivia remove the parts from an item currently in your evidence bag? Marlene paused. Again, the bridge was missing. She had a conclusion but no path. She must have known I found it. How? Because the cat told her. The courtroom nearly lost control. I raised my hand sharply. No laughter. Not because the statement was logical. It was not. But because underneath Marlene's accusation, I could now hear something more unstable than ordinary anger. And while a courtroom is not a therapy room, it is also not a place where distress should be turned into entertainment. I looked at Marlene carefully. Ems Whitaker, are you telling this court you believe the cat communicated to Ms. Bennett that you had found the object? She lifted her chin. I believe she trained him. That is not what I asked. She did not answer. That moment changed my approach. I was no longer dealing with only a neighborhood dispute. I was dealing with a woman whose fear had grown into accusation and whose accusation had now become legal action. But there was still an unexplained fact. How did the object get under Pumpkin's collar? Then Mark spoke. Your Honor, may I ask something? I allowed it. He turned to Olivia. Didn't Mrs. Whitaker give Pumpkin that little charm 2 months ago? Olivia's eyes widened. Yes. Marlene's face changed, just slightly, but I saw it. Olivia explained that Marlene had purchased a small lucky pet charm from a local craft fair. At that time, Marlene was still friendly enough with Pumpkin. She had called him my little porch buddy and asked if she could attach the charm to his collar because it had a tiny magnet shaped like a fish. Olivia thought it was odd but harmless. Marlene interrupted. I did not. Olivia said, you did. I even texted Mark a picture because I thought it was funny. Now we had something concrete, a text message. Olivia searched her phone. A minute later, the clerk displayed a photo on the monitor. There was Pumpkin on Olivia's kitchen floor, wearing the same blue collar. Hanging from it was a small black fish-shaped charm. The date stamp on the photo showed it had been taken 9 weeks earlier. The casing on the evidence table looked similar in size and color, not identical from the outside, because the decorative fish shape had apparently broken off, leaving the rectangular magnetic housing behind. But close enough that the technician nodded and said it could be the same item. Marlene stared at the screen, her face reddened. That is not the same thing. I asked, did you give the cat a charm? She looked away. That was the answer. She had. Which meant Marlene had found an object under Pumpkin's collar that she herself had placed there weeks earlier, forgotten or reimagined it, and transformed it into proof of surveillance. But the case was still not over, because Olivia then submitted something of her own. She said she had not wanted to bring it up because she felt sorry for Marlene. But after being accused of spying, after having her husband accused, after watching Pumpkin brought into court as evidence, she believed the court needed to see the full pattern. She handed over a folder. Inside were printed screenshots, text messages, HOA emails, doorbell camera stills, and a police non-emergency report. The first screenshot was a message from Marlene to Olivia, sent 3 months earlier. It read, tell your cat I know what he's doing. The courtroom went still. The second message read, if Pumpkin comes near my window again, I will consider him an agent of trespass. The third, you think because you're a teacher everyone trusts you. I see through you. Olivia's voice shook as she explained that the messages became more frequent and more hostile. she had stopped responding. Mark had asked Marlene in person to leave them alone. That made it worse. Then came the doorbell footage. The monitor showed Marlene standing on the Bennett's porch at 11:43 p.m., holding Pumpkin in her arms. She rang the doorbell 4 times. When nobody answered, she leaned toward the camera and said, "Your operative has been returned." Olivia looked humiliated. Mark looked furious. Marlene stared at the screen without blinking. I felt the energy in the room shift again, because now it was no longer simply Marlene fearing the cat. It was Marlene harassing the family. I asked Olivia why she had not filed for a protective order earlier. She said, "Because I thought if we ignored it, it would stop. And because I knew people would laugh if I said my neighbor thought our cat was spying on her." That sentence hurt more than it sounded. People often stay silent because they fear ridicule. They endure harassment because the story sounds too strange to be taken seriously. And sometimes abusers or unstable accusers rely on that. They know the victim will hesitate because the truth itself sounds absurd. Then Olivia looked at me and said, "Your Honor, she didn't just bring us to court. She posted about us online." Marlene's posture stiffened, Olivia continued. She said Marlene had made several neighborhood group posts calling Olivia a surveillance teacher, accusing Mark of using emergency responder equipment to monitor her, and warning parents that Pumpkin was being used to collect information. Doc Kuntz from Olivia's school had seen it. That mattered. An accusation that sounds ridiculous inside a courtroom can still damage a person's career outside of it. A teacher's reputation is fragile. One rumor, one screenshot, one parent with fear instead of context, and the damage spreads. Olivia said 2 parents had asked the school principal whether she was involved in neighborhood spying. One parent requested their child be moved from her classroom. Her voice broke when she said that Marlene did not look sorry. She looked cornered, and cornered people are often the most dangerous witnesses. She suddenly pointed at Olivia and said, "Ask her about the envelope." Olivia froze. That was the first time I saw real fear cross her face, not confusion, fear. I leaned forward. "What envelope?" Marlene smiled slowly. And it was the first moment in the case when she no longer looked irrational. She looked prepared. "The envelope her husband dropped in my mailbox by mistake," she said. "The one that proves they were watching me before the cat ever came into my yard." Mark Bennett's face went pale. Olivia whispered, "Marlene, don't." The courtroom turned toward the Bennetts. And I realized the case had just shifted again, because for the first time all morning, Marlene Whitaker had said something that made Olivia Bennett afraid. The word envelope changed Olivia Bennett's face. Until that moment, she had been tired, embarrassed, and wounded by Marlene Whitaker's accusations. She had looked like a woman who had spent months trying to survive a neighbor's obsession without becoming cruel in return. But when Marlene mentioned that envelope, something different appeared in Olivia's eyes. Fear. And fear, when it appears suddenly in someone who has been calm, always deserves attention. I leaned forward from the bench. "What envelope?" I asked again. Marlene's expression shifted into something close to satisfaction. For the first time that morning, she did not look like a woman fighting a conspiracy. She looked like a woman who had been waiting for the right moment to pull a blade from under the table. She reached into her folder slowly. Olivia whispered, "Please don't." That whisper was quiet, but the courtroom heard it. So did I. And I want you to understand something about cases like this. A person can be wrong about many things and still be right about one thing. Marlene's belief that a cat was spying on her was not supported by the evidence. The black object was not a recorder. The photos did not prove surveillance. Her messages showed escalating harassment. But if she possessed a document that frightened Olivia, I could not ignore it simply because the rest of Marlene's claims had fallen apart. Truth is not always loyal to the person we expect. Marlene handed the envelope to the bailiff. The paper was slightly wrinkled, sealed once, and then reopened. On the front, written in black ink, was Marlene Whitaker's address, but the name above it was not hers. It said Mark Bennett. That was strange. Mark sat beside Olivia with his jaw tight, staring at the envelope like he recognized it and hated seeing it again. I asked Mr. Bennett, "Is this yours?" He took a breath. "It was," he said. The courtroom shifted. Marlene smiled. Olivia looked down at her hands. I asked Mark to explain before Marlene could take over the story. He said the envelope had been delivered to Marlene's mailbox by mistake nearly 4 months earlier. It was intended for him. The address was similar because their homes were side by side, and the mail carrier had apparently placed it in the wrong slot. Marlene opened it, claiming she did not notice the names until afterward. Marlene interrupted, "That is a lie. I noticed after I read what was inside. I looked at her. That does not help you." She closed her mouth. The bailiff brought the contents to the clerk. Inside was a printed form from an ambulance service provider, along with handwritten notes on a separate page. The top of the document contained Mark Bennett's name and employee identification number. At first, it looked like a scheduling document. But then I saw Marlene's name, not just once, several times. I looked up at Mark. "Why is Miss Whitaker's name on a document connected to your workplace?" Mark rubbed both hands over his face. Because the case had become uncomfortable now, not absurd, not funny, not merely strange, uncomfortable. He explained that several months earlier there had been a 911 call on Marlene's street. Marlene had reported chest pains late at night. Mark's ambulance unit had not been the one assigned to the call, but he later heard about it from a coworker because the address was beside his home. That alone would have been improper gossip, perhaps, but not necessarily surveillance. Then Mark admitted something more serious. He said he had looked at the call log afterward. The courtroom became completely still. Olivia closed her eyes. Marlene folded her arms, victorious. I asked Mark, "Did you have a professional reason to access that information?" He answered quietly, "No, Your Honor." That was the first honest, damaging answer from the Bennetts, and I appreciated that he did not decorate it. No excuses, no long emotional explanation, no attempt to blame the cat, the neighbor, the mail carrier, or anyone else. Just no. I have learned to recognize when a person knows they crossed a line. Mark Bennett knew. He explained that after Marlene began accusing Olivia of spying, after the late-night doorbell visits and the online posts, he became worried that her behavior might escalate. When he heard there had been an emergency call at her address, he looked up the call disposition to see whether it involved violence, mental distress, or danger to neighbors. He said he did not print medical details. He did not share health information. But he admitted he accessed a call record he should not have accessed. Marlene leaned toward me. "You see, they were watching me." Her words had new power now, not complete power, but enough, because Mark had given her one real fact inside a mountain of imagined ones, and that is how many neighbor wars become impossible to untangle. One side exaggerates, invents, or spirals. The other side, exhausted and frightened, makes one bad decision. Then that bad decision becomes fuel for every accusation that came before it. I turned to Olivia. "Did you know he accessed this record?" Olivia's voice trembled. "Not when he did it. He told me affirmation. Did you use that information?" "No. I told him he was wrong. I told him never to do anything like that again." Marlene scoffed. But Olivia continued, and her voice broke. "I was scared, Your Honor. She was coming to our house at night. She was posting about me online. She was telling people at school that I was using my cat to spy on her. I didn't ask Mark to check anything. I didn't want any of this." I watched Marlene as Olivia spoke. Her eyes were bright, but not with tears, with triumph. She did not look relieved that a real boundary violation had been revealed. She looked pleased that she could finally pull Olivia down with her. That told me something important. Marlene did not want safety. She wanted confirmation. And confirmation for a person trapped in suspicion can become more valuable than peace. I asked Marlene how she got the envelope. She said it arrived in her mailbox by mistake. She opened it, saw her name, and realized the Bennetts had been tracking her. She kept it because she knew nobody would believe her. I asked why she did not bring it to police. She said, "They never listen." "Did you bring it to the ambulance service?" "No." "Did you bring it to the homeowners association?" "They are all friends." "Did you include it in your initial complaint?" She hesitated. No, she had not. That mattered. If this envelope was truly the strongest proof of surveillance, why hide it until the cat evidence failed? Why lead with photographs of Pumpkin in a flower bed and a broken charm under a collar if she had a document showing improper access to her emergency record? The answer was not hard to see. Marlene did not want the envelope examined carefully. She wanted it used dramatically. There is a difference. I asked the clerk to read the handwritten notes. Mark looked ashamed before a single word was spoken. The notes were brief. They listed dates of Marlene's late-night visits to the Bennett's porch, screenshots of posts, the date of the 911 call, and a line that said, "Possible unstable behavior. Document everything." Marlene pointed at him. "There. He wrote that I'm unstable." Mark said, "Because you were harassing my wife." Marlene snapped. "Because your wife sent a cat to watch me." And there the loop closed again. A real privacy violation had been committed by Mark. But Marlene's explanation returned to the cat. Her fear did not adjust to new evidence. It absorbed it. That is when I began to see the full tragedy of the case. Marlene Whitaker was not simply lying. She was not fully right either. She was a woman who had turned loneliness, divorce, suspicion, and one improper act by a neighbor's husband into an entire conspiracy. She had harassed Olivia. She had defamed her online. She had dragged a cat into court as evidence. But Mark Bennett had also crossed a line he had no right to cross. And now, every person in that courtroom had to face the uncomfortable truth that nobody's hands were completely clean. I asked Mark if his employer knew. He said no. I told him they would. His face fell, but he nodded. That reaction mattered. Accountability accepted quietly is different from accountability resisted. Mark knew consequences were coming. Olivia looked devastated, not because the accusation was entirely true, but because a piece of it was true enough to hurt her defense. Marlene, meanwhile, looked energized. She said, "I want damages. I want her fired. I want him charged. I want everyone to know I was right." That sentence revealed the emotional engine beneath the entire case. I was right. Not I want peace. Not I want privacy restored. Not I want the harassment to stop. I was right. The need to be right can become dangerous when it matters more than reality. I asked Marlene whether she had ever threatened Pumpkin. Olivia's head lifted. Marlene looked offended. No. I asked again. Did you ever tell Olivia that if Pumpkin came into your yard again, he would not come back? She froze. Olivia reached into her folder and produced another message. The clerk displayed it. Marlene had written, "If your little spy crosses my fence again, don't ask me where he went." The courtroom became cold. Marlene immediately said that was not a threat. That was a warning. I looked at her. Ems Whitaker, when a person says an animal may disappear if it enters their yard, that is a threat. She shook her head. I was scared. Fear again. Fear had become her defense for everything. Fear of the cat. Fear of the neighbor. Fear of the school teacher. Fear of the paramedic. Fear of the HOA. Fear of the mail carrier. Fear of being watched. But fear does not give a person unlimited rights. That is one of the hardest truths a courtroom must sometimes deliver. Your fear may explain your behavior, but it does not automatically excuse it, especially when your behavior damages innocent people. Then Olivia submitted the final piece from her side, a letter from her school principal. She had not wanted to include it, she said, because it was humiliating. But Marlene's online posts had reached parents. The letter confirmed that the school had received complaints about Olivia from 2 parents who referenced neighborhood surveillance allegations. No discipline had been taken, but Olivia had been asked to explain the situation to administration. As the letter was read, Olivia cried silently, not loud, not performative, just tears falling while she stared at the table. I have seen that kind of humiliation before, the humiliation of having to explain something insane to people whose respect you depend on. It is a special kind of cruelty because the accusation does not have to be believable to hurt you. It only has to be repeated. Marlene looked away. For the first time, I wondered if she felt a small piece of shame. Then she destroyed that possibility. She should have controlled her cat. That was all she said. No apology, no recognition that Olivia's career had been touched, no concern that Mark's mistake, while real, did not justify months of public accusation. Just the cat, always the cat. That was when I asked a question that made the entire room quiet. Emmons Whitaker, why did you bring Pumpkin to court today? She blinked. As evidence. Evidence of what? That he was used. By whom? Olivia. For what purpose? To spy on me. With what device? She pointed toward the evidence table. The recorder. The technician testified it is not a recorder. She switched it. When? I don't know. How? I don't know. Where is the original recorder? I don't know. The repetition settled over the room. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. And underneath every I don't know was the same demand. Believe me anyway. That is not how justice works. Then Pumpkin woke up. He stretched inside the carrier, yawned, and pushed his face against the small metal door. Olivia instinctively turned toward him, her face softening with worry. Whatever had happened between these neighbors, her love for that animal was real. Marlene noticed Olivia's expression and said, "He likes my house better." Olivia looked at her. What? He kept coming back because he likes me better. The statement was childish. But something in Olivia's face changed. Not fear now, anger. He kept coming back because you fed him and then trapped him. Marlene snapped. I did not trap him. Olivia opened her folder again. Mark put a hand on her arm, as if warning her. She ignored it. She pulled out one more photograph. It showed a wire animal trap beside Marlene's patio. Inside the trap was a small bowl. Marlene's face drained. I looked at the photograph carefully. There was no cat in the trap. But the trap existed, and beside it, visible on the concrete patio, was a can of tuna. I asked Marlene, "Did you set a trap for Pumpkin?" She said nothing. Emmons Whitaker? Her voice was low. I needed to prove it. Prove what? That he was coming. Olivia whispered, "We were looking for him for 2 days." The courtroom shifted again. I asked Olivia to explain. She said Pumpkin had disappeared for 2 days about a month earlier. They searched the neighborhood. They posted online. They asked neighbors. Marlene denied seeing him. Then Pumpkin came home late at night, smelling like tuna and garage dust, frightened and missing his collar, the same collar Marlene later claimed contained the recorder. That was the first moment the real shape of the cat evidence became clear. Marlene had trapped Pumpkin, removed his collar, found or broke the charm she herself had placed there, convinced herself it was a recording device, then brought the cat and the object to court as proof of a conspiracy. I asked Marlene if she had kept Pumpkin in her garage. She looked at me, eyes hard. He was evidence. The room went silent, not because the statement was loud, because it was chilling. A living animal had become, in her mind, an object in her case. That was the moment I stopped seeing this as only an absurd neighborhood dispute. The cat was not spying. But Marlene had crossed from accusation into control. She had trapped someone else's pet, withheld him, removed his collar, and used him to support a claim that had no factual foundation. And Olivia Bennet, despite Mark's improper mistake, had been living beside a woman willing to justify almost anything if it helped her feel right. I looked at Marlene and said, "You trapped the cat." She said, "I preserved evidence." "No," I said. "You took an animal that did not belong to you." Marlene's eyes narrowed, and then she said something that told me part 4 of this case would not simply be about a cat, a neighbor, or an envelope. She said, "If I hadn't taken him, no one would have found what Olivia buried in my yard." Olivia's face went pale again. Mark turned sharply toward his wife. The gallery went completely still, and I remember thinking, with a heaviness I can still feel years later, that the strangest case of the morning had just opened a door into something far more serious. When Marlene Whitaker said Olivia had buried something in her yard, the courtroom changed again. It was not the same silence we had heard when the so-called recording device was opened and exposed as nothing more than a broken charm. It was not the awkward silence that followed her claims about Pumpkin being trained to spy. This silence had weight, because for the first time, Marlene had moved from strange interpretation to a specific accusation involving physical evidence. And Olivia Bennet looked afraid. That mattered. I had watched Olivia endure ridiculous claims with exhaustion. I had watched her face embarrassment when her school was mentioned. I had watched her absorb the pain of Mark's improper access to Marlene's emergency call record. But this was different. Her eyes moved toward her husband, then down to the table, then back to Marlene. Fear has direction. Hers pointed toward whatever Marlene had just said. I asked Marlene, "What exactly are you claiming was buried in your yard?" She straightened her shoulders. "A box." "What kind of box?" "A metal box." "What was inside it?" She paused. That pause bothered me. If someone finds a suspicious box buried in their yard, the contents should come quickly. Fear, confusion, concern, all understandable. But Marlene paused like a person deciding how much of the story to reveal and how much to save for effect. Finally, she said, Olivia whispered, "No." It was barely audible, but I heard it. So did Mark. He turned toward her slowly. "Olivia?" That one word from him carried something heavy. It was not accusation yet. It was the sound of a husband realizing his wife might know something he did not. Marlene saw it and smiled. Not a wide smile, a small one, that told me she had been waiting for this moment. I asked Marlene where the box was. She said she had it in her car. I stared at her for a moment. "You came into court accusing your neighbor of surveillance by cat, brought the cat in a carrier, brought a broken charm in an evidence bag, but left a metal box of documents in your car." Marlene's smile weakened. I didn't know if I would need it. That answer did not satisfy me. People who believe they have decisive proof usually do not leave it outside. They bring it first. They display it first. They do not spend half a hearing arguing about an orange tabby on a fence if they have buried documents that prove their claim, unless the documents are not what they claim, or unless they obtained them in a way they do not want examined. I ordered the bailiff to retrieve the box from Marlene's vehicle. While we waited, I turned back to Olivia, Mrs. Bennet. "Do you know what Miss Whitaker is referring to?" Olivia's face had lost color. She looked toward Mark again. He was watching her now carefully, and I could see his anger mixing with confusion, not the loud kind. The quieter kind that forms when someone feels blindsided in public. Olivia said, "I don't know what she found." That was not the same as no. I asked a more direct question. "Did you bury anything in Miss Whitaker's yard?" Her eyes filled with his yard. Her eyes filled with tears. "No." That answer came quickly, but then she added, "Not in her yard." The courtroom seemed to lean forward. Mark closed his eyes. And I remember thinking that the truth had finally stopped hiding behind the absurdity of the cat. The case was no longer funny, not even in the distant way it had seemed at the beginning. We were now looking at privacy, harassment, fear, retaliation, and something buried between two houses, I asked Olivia to explain. She took a breath so unsteady I thought she might not continue. She said that after months of Marlene's accusations, late-night visits, and online posts, she began documenting everything. Not because she wanted to spy, but because she was afraid no one would believe her. She kept screenshots, she saved doorbell clips, she wrote down dates, and yes, she had placed a small waterproof container near the fence line on her own side of the property with printed copies of messages and notes. I asked why she would put them outside instead of keeping them in the house. Her answer was quiet, because Marlene kept saying she was going to report me to my school, and I was scared Mark would throw the papers away to avoid more conflict. Mark looked at her sharply. I would not have done that. Olivia turned toward him, tears falling now. You kept telling me to ignore her. That sentence told me the emotional truth inside their marriage at that moment. Mark had wanted the conflict to end by starving it of attention. Olivia had wanted proof in case silence failed. Neither instinct was irrational, but both had consequences. Marlene had found the container. The question was how. The bailiff returned with a small metal box sealed inside a clear evidence bag. It was scratched, dirt-stained, and dented at one corner. My clerk opened it carefully and removed several folded papers. They were not secret plans. They were not surveillance records. They were not photographs taken through windows. They were printed screenshots of Marlene's own messages, copies of HOA complaint emails, and handwritten notes in Olivia's neat script describing dates and incidents. But there was one document that did not belong with the rest, a printed map of the property line. Marlene pointed at it. There. She marked my windows. Olivia shook her head. No. I marked where your cameras point. That sentence shifted the room again. I asked, what cameras? Olivia said Marlene had installed 2 exterior cameras after moving in. One faced the driveway, which was normal. The other, according to Olivia, had been angled toward the Bennett's side yard and back door. Olivia had asked her to adjust it. Marlene refused and said, if you have nothing to hide, why do you care? I looked at Marlene. Do you have cameras facing the Bennett property? For my safety. That was not my question. She tightened her mouth. They may capture part of the side yard. Olivia said, our back door, our kitchen window, Mark coming and going, me letting Pumpkin out. The room became very still because now Marlene, who had accused her neighbor of surveillance through a cat, was admitting that her own cameras might be recording portions of the neighbor's home. That is something I have seen before. Accusation as projection, not always conscious, not always deliberate, but often the thing a person claims to fear is the very thing they are doing. I asked Marlene if she had footage from those cameras. She hesitated. That was answer enough. I ordered her to submit any footage relevant to her claims, particularly footage showing Olivia allegedly burying the box. Marlene said, it's on my phone. Then provide it. She looked uncomfortable, but she complied. The clerk connected the file to the courtroom monitor. The video showed Marlene's side yard at night. The angle was high, likely from an exterior camera mounted under an eave. The fence line was visible. A narrow strip of grass beyond it showed part of the Bennett's property. The timestamp read 2:14 a.m. Olivia appeared in the frame wearing a hoodie and slippers, carrying something small. Mark looked at her, stunned. Olivia lowered her head. On the screen, she knelt near the fence on her own side, moved some mulch, and placed the small metal box beside a row of shrubs. She was not in Marlene's yard. At least from the angle shown, she was on the Bennett side. Marlene said, see, she was hiding evidence. I said, she appears to be on her own property. She was hiding it from me. I looked at Marlene. You were recording her at 2:14 in the morning for safety. Your camera captured her on her own property near her own shrubs. Marlene had no answer. Then the video continued longer than she expected. That is often where truth lives. After the point, someone thought the clip would stop. Olivia left the frame. A few minutes passed. Then movement appeared on Marlene's side of the fence. Marlene herself walked into view wearing a robe and slippers. The gallery became silent. On the screen, Marlene looked over the fence, then moved toward the gate between the properties. She opened it, not forced, not broken, opened it. She stepped into the Bennett's yard with a flashlight. Olivia gasped. Mark sat upright. Marlene said, that part isn't relevant. I did not look away from the screen. It is now. The footage showed Marlene crossing into Olivia's yard, kneeling by the shrubs, digging through the mulch, removing the metal box, and carrying it back to her own property. The timestamp kept running 2:29 a.m. That meant within 15 minutes of Olivia placing the box on her own side of the fence, Marlene entered her neighbor's yard and took it. I paused the video. Ems Whitaker, I said, you took this box from the Bennett's property. She said, it was evidence. Evidence you obtained by entering their property at night. She buried it near my fence. On her side, she was hiding things about me. I looked at her for several seconds. No. She was documenting things you had done. Marlene's face hardened. And this is where the case became psychologically clear. Marlene could not tolerate being observed, even through the consequences of her own behavior. She saw documentation as surveillance. She saw boundaries as attacks. She saw a cat as an operative, a teacher as a spy, a paramedic's improper call log access as proof of an entire neighborhood conspiracy. Yet she installed cameras, entered property at night, trapped Pumpkin, removed his collar, and carried a neighbor's private documentation into court. She feared invasion, so she invaded. I asked Olivia why she placed the box outside at 2:14 a.m. She said she had been unable to sleep after receiving another message from Marlene. The clerk displayed that message from Olivia's phone. Marlene had written, your school will know what kind of woman you are before the week ends. Olivia said she panicked. She printed everything again, placed it in the box, and hid it because she wanted proof safe in case her phone was damaged, deleted, or Mark convinced her to stop documenting. Mark's face softened then. I think he finally understood how frightened Olivia had been. Not annoyed, not dramatic frightened. He whispered, I'm sorry. She did not answer, but her shoulders broke slightly. I have seen marriages in court bend under the weight of public truth. Sometimes they break. Sometimes the truth hurts enough to make both people finally see each other clearly. I did not know which would happen for the Bennetts, but I knew Olivia had been carrying more fear than Mark realized. Then I turned back to Marlene. Did you open the box? Yes. Did you copy its contents? She hesitated. Mrs. Whitaker? I took pictures. Did you post any of them online? No. The answer came too quickly. I asked again. She looked away. Olivia whispered, she did. The clerk displayed another screenshot. It was from a neighborhood social media group. Marlene had posted a blurred photograph of the property line map and written, caught my neighbor hiding a dossier near my fence. This is how surveillance begins. Below it were comments from neighbors, some confused, some mocking, some concerned. One comment mentioned Olivia's school. Olivia looked down in humiliation. That is how reputational damage spreads. Not always through a believable accusation, but through a strange one, repeated enough times that people begin to wonder if there is something beneath it. Suspicion does not need proof to wound. It only needs visibility. I asked Marlene whether she understood that she had publicly posted private documents taken from her neighbor's property. She said, "They were about me. That does not make them yours." She stared at me. I continued, "If someone writes down that you came to their house at night, that document does not become your property because your name appears in it." The courtroom remained silent. Then Mark Bennett spoke again, quietly. "Your Honor, I know I was wrong for checking the call log." I looked at him. He said, "But after seeing this, I was scared she was going to hurt my wife." Marlene snapped, "I never touched her." Olivia said, "You trapped my cat." Marlene fired back because he was part of it. And there it was, the cat again, the center of Marlene's story. Even as every piece of evidence revealed something else. I asked the technician to examine Pumpkin's collar, which Olivia had brought separately. He confirmed that the missing charm attachment matched the broken casing Marlene submitted. He also confirmed it had no recording capability. The device was not a device. It was a charm Marlene herself had given the cat that should have ended that part of the claim. But Marlene refused to let it. She said, maybe that one wasn't the recorder. Maybe there was another one. "Where is it?" I asked. "Olivia removed it." "When?" "I don't know." "How?" "I don't know." "Evidence. She's a teacher. She knows how to hide things." That line saddened me, because now Olivia's profession, once a source of trust and service, had become part of Lean's imagined conspiracy. A teacher became a manipulator. A cat became an agent. A pet charm became a bug. A documentation box became a dossier. A camera pointed at a neighbor became safety, while a neighbor writing down harassment became surveillance. This was not truth. This was a worldview. But then, just as I thought the major facts had been exposed, Daniel, the courthouse technician, asked permission to speak again. He had been reviewing the metadata on the video file Marlene provided. And what he said next pulled every eye in the room back toward the screen. He said, "Your Honor, this clip appears to have been trimmed." Marlene stiffened. I asked him to explain. He said the file began at 2:14 a.m., but the source camera recording started earlier. There was a missing segment before the submitted clip. The metadata indicated the exported file had been cut. I turned to Marlene. "Did you trim this video?" She said, "Only the boring part." What happened in the boring part? Nothing. Experience has taught me that when someone calls missing footage boring, it is rarely boring. I instructed her to produce the full recording. She said she did not have it. The technician looked at her phone and said the original appeared to still be stored in the camera app. Marlene's face went pale. For the first time all morning, her certainty collapsed into something close to dread. The full footage was loaded. The timestamp began at 1:58 a.m. At first, nothing moved. The side yard sat quiet under a weak porch light. Rainwater glistened along the fence. Then, at 2:06 a.m., Marlene appeared on her own patio. She was carrying Pumpkin. The courtroom froze. Olivia whispered, "Oh my God." On the screen, Marlene opened the carrier, took Pumpkin out, and placed him near the fence. Then she sprinkled something along the ground near the shrubs on Olivia's side. The technician zoomed in. It looked like cat treats. Marlene then stepped back into the shadows. 8 minutes later, Olivia appeared from her back door, holding the metal box. She placed it near the shrubs and went inside. Then Pumpkin crossed toward the area where Marlene had sprinkled the treats. Then Marlene entered Olivia's yard and removed the box. The trap was suddenly visible. Marlene had not simply discovered the box. She had staged the conditions around it. She had brought Pumpkin into the frame to support her story that the cat led her to the evidence. The courtroom was silent. And I remember looking at Marlene Whitaker as the truth finally sharpened into focus. She had not found evidence. She had built a scene. And the next question was why? When the full footage appeared on the courtroom monitor, I watched Marlene Whitaker stop breathing for a moment. Not literally, of course. But there is a kind of stillness that comes over a person when the truth steps into the room before they can block the door. Her shoulders tightened. Her face lost its color. The folder in front of her suddenly looked less like evidence and more like a collection of props from a performance that had gone terribly wrong. The video was clear enough. At 2:06 a.m., Marlene walked onto her patio carrying Pumpkin, not finding him, not rescuing him, carrying him. The orange tabby looked stiff and confused in her arms. His blue collar was visible. Marlene placed him near the fence, opened a small container, and sprinkled what appeared to be treats along the ground near the shrubs beside Olivia Bennett's property line. Then she stepped back into the shadows. The courtroom was silent. Even Pumpkin, sitting inside the carrier at the front of the room, had gone quiet. Olivia Bennett's face had turned pale. Mark Bennett was staring at the screen with a kind of restrained fury I have seen in men who know they must remain calm because the room is watching. Marlene's own evidence was now showing that she had staged the scene she claimed to have discovered, and I want you to understand how serious that was. This was no longer a confused woman misreading a cat's behavior. This was no longer simply a neighbor conflict inflated by fear. This was staging, planning, manipulation. Marlene had brought Pumpkin into the scene, lured him toward the exact area where Olivia had placed her documentation box, then later presented that sequence as if the cat had led her to secret evidence. She had created the illusion of discovery. That is the moment a case crosses a line. Fear may explain why someone misunderstands. It may explain why someone calls the police too often, why they misread a neighbor's porch light, why they believe whispers are about them when they are not. But fear does not explain staging evidence. That requires intent. The footage continued. At 2:14 a.m., Olivia came outside in a hoodie and slippers, carrying the metal box. She looked tired, almost frightened, glancing once toward Marlene's house before kneeling on her own side of the fence and placing the box beside the shrubs. Marlene, hidden in the darkness, waited. I watched Olivia on the screen and understood something painful. She was not burying secrets. She was hiding proof because she felt no one had protected her. She thought if the messages disappeared, if her phone broke, if her husband convinced her to stop documenting, she would have nothing left to show that she had not imagined the harassment. People do desperate things when they feel alone. Then the video showed Pumpkin move toward the treats. The timing was unmistakable. Marlene had placed him there before Olivia came out. She had not followed the cat to the box. She had used the cat to justify taking it. At 2:29 a.m., Marlene opened the side gate, crossed into the Bennett's yard, knelt by the shrubs, took the metal box, and carried it back to her own property. I paused the video. The room stayed frozen. I looked at Marlene and asked, "Why did you carry Pumpkin into that area before Mrs. Bennett came outside?" She swallowed. "I didn't." The monitor behind her still showed the paused image of Marlene holding the cat. That is the strange arrogance of some lies. They survive even while the truth is glowing 10 feet behind the person speaking. I asked again, "Ms. Whitaker, the video shows you carrying the cat." She looked at the screen, then back at me. I was returning him. At 2 o'clock in the morning, he was in my yard. Then why place treats near the fence? She paused. There it was again, the missing bridge. I wanted him to stay still. Why? So I could see where he went. Why did you need to see where he went if you were simply returning him? No answer. The courtroom did not need me to explain the contradiction. Everyone heard it. Everyone felt it. Marlene was trying to walk backward through a story that had already collapsed behind her. Then Olivia spoke, her voice shaking. "You trapped him before that, didn't you?" Marlene snapped. I protected myself. You kept our cat in your garage for 2 days. He was evidence. The word landed again. Evidence. I leaned forward. Ems Whitaker, Pumpkin is a living animal, not a document, not a camera, not an exhibit you get to seize because you have convinced yourself he is part of a conspiracy. Marlene's eyes flashed. He was on my property. That does not give you the right to trap him, remove his collar, hold him, stage footage, enter your neighbor's yard, and take her private documents. She shook her head violently. You are all ignoring what she did. What did she do? She watched me. With what? The cat. The answer came instantly, automatically, almost desperately, and in that moment, the case revealed its emotional center. Marlene could not release the cat theory because it held her entire world together. If Pumpkin was just a cat, then the months of messages, the porch visits, the online posts, the trap, the stolen box, the lawsuit, all of it became unjustifiable. So Pumpkin could not be just a cat. He had to be evidence. He had to be an agent. He had to be the thing that made Marlene right. I asked the technician to continue the recording. The next portion showed something none of us expected. After Marlene took the box back to her patio, she did not open it immediately. Instead, she went to the garage. A few seconds later, she returned with Pumpkin's collar in her hand. Olivia gasped. On the screen, Marlene sat at a small patio table under the porch light. She examined the collar, turned it over, and then removed the small black charm attached beneath it. She tried to pry it open with what looked like a butter knife. The charm cracked. A piece fell onto the table. She picked it up, stared at it, and then looked toward the Bennett house. For a moment, she smiled. It was small, but it was there. That smile told me she had not discovered fear. She had discovered opportunity. The technician zoomed in as much as he could. The footage was grainy, but the sequence was clear. Marlene broke the charm herself. Then she placed the broken piece into a plastic bag. The same plastic bag she had brought into my courtroom, the same object she had called a recording device, the same evidence she had used to accuse Olivia Bennett of surveillance. Olivia whispered. She broke it. Mark's fists tightened on the table. Marlene said, I was checking it. I looked at her. No, Miss Whitaker. You broke it, bagged it, and presented it as if you found it that way. That is not true. Again, the screen disagreed with her. Then came the moment that made the case go from disturbing to viral. The footage showed Marlene open the metal box and remove the papers. She flipped through the screenshots, the printed messages, the property map, the notes Olivia had written. At first, she looked angry. Then she took out her phone. She began recording herself. The camera on the house captured only part of her face as she held the phone up, but her voice was picked up by the exterior camera microphone. She said, I knew it. I knew this teacher was building a file on me. She thinks she can hide evidence by the fence and send her cat over here like some little spy. Well, now I have proof. She looked directly into her phone camera. Then she said something I will never forget. By tomorrow, her school will know, her neighbors will know, parents will know. Nobody lets a surveillance freak teach their children. Olivia broke down, not loudly. She simply folded forward, covering her face with both hands. That was the human cost, not the cat theory, not the absurdity, not the strange courtroom spectacle. A real woman, a teacher, had been living under the threat that her reputation would be poisoned by a neighbor who had built a fantasy and then manufactured evidence to support it. Marlene had not only believed something false, she had planned to punish Olivia for it. I stopped the video. For several seconds, I said nothing. Sometimes silence from the bench is necessary, not for drama, for weight. People need to feel the seriousness of what has just been revealed before the law responds to it. Then I asked Marlene, did you post that video? She stared ahead. Answer me. I posted part of it. What part the part about the box. Did you post the part showing you placing the cat near the fence? She said nothing. Did you post the part showing you breaking the charm? Nothing. Did you post the part showing you entering the Bennett property? Still nothing. Of course she had not, because Marlene did what manipulative people do with footage. She cut away the parts that showed her actions and published the parts that made her look like a victim, and that is one of the most dangerous forms of modern dishonesty. Half video can become a full weapon. A cropped clip can destroy a person faster than a sworn lie ever could. Marlene had not needed the world to understand. She only needed the world to react. I turned to Olivia. Did the school see this video? Olivia nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Mark answered for her. A parent sent it to the principal. It was in a neighborhood group first, then someone reposted it. I asked Olivia if she had been disciplined. She shook her head, tears still falling. Not officially, but I was called into the office. I had to explain why a neighbor was saying I kept files on her and used my cat to watch her house. I had to say those words out loud to my principal. Her voice cracked, and I could tell he didn't believe her. But I could also tell he was worried other parents might. That is how reputations are damaged. Not always by belief, sometimes by doubt. Doubt is enough. Doubt makes employers cautious. Doubt makes parents nervous. Doubt makes friends quiet. Doubt makes innocent people explain things that should never have touched their name. Marlene had created doubt on purpose. Then Mark spoke, his voice low. I made it worse. Olivia looked at him. He continued, when I accessed that call log, I gave her the one real thing she could use to make everything else seem possible. I appreciated that honesty. It did not erase his mistake, but it showed he understood it. In court, that matters. People who accept their part in the damage can begin to repair it. People who deny everything usually continue causing harm. Marlene turned on him immediately. You violated my privacy. Mark nodded. Yes, I did. That stopped her for a second. He continued, and I will answer for that, but I did not train a cat to spy on you. Olivia did not send Pumpkin into your yard, and you had no right to do what you did to my wife. There it was, the cleanest summary anyone had spoken all morning. Two truths can exist in the same courtroom. Mark was wrong and Marlene was wrong, but they were not wrong in the same way, and they did not cause the same harm. Marlene had built a campaign. She had trapped an animal, staged footage, stolen a box, posted edited clips, accused a teacher, harassed a family, and used a living pet as a courtroom exhibit. Then the technician raised one more issue. He said the full footage contained audio from a phone call Marlene made after recording herself. Marlene immediately objected. That's private. I asked the technician whether the audio came from Marlene's own exterior camera recording submitted to the court. He said yes, Marlene had submitted the file. The recording captured her on her own patio. She had brought it into evidence, perhaps not realizing the full audio was still embedded. I allowed the relevant portion to be played. The courtroom listened as Marlene stood on her patio, phone against her ear, speaking to someone we could not hear. Her voice was sharper than before. No, I don't care if it sounds crazy. Crazy gets attention. Olivia slowly lifted her head. Marlene continued on the recording. If I say she's just keeping notes, nobody cares. But if I say she used the cat, people listen. The room went completely still. Even I felt the impact of that sentence. There it was. The truth beneath the performance, not confusion, not fear. Strategy, crazy gets attention. If I say she used the cat, people listen. Marlene Whitaker had understood exactly how absurd the accusation sounded. She had used the absurdity as fuel because absurd stories spread faster than ordinary ones. A neighbor keeping documentation might not interest the internet. A teacher allegedly using a cat as a spy would. That was the viral moment. The courtroom heard it in her own voice. Olivia's mouth opened slightly, but no words came. Mark looked like he had been struck. Marlene's face collapsed, not into remorse, but into exposure. I asked, "Is that your voice?" She did not answer. I asked again. Finally, she said, "I was angry." That answer was almost identical to so many I have heard before. I was angry. I was upset. I was scared. I was under pressure. All of those may be true. None of them erase intent. I looked at her and said, "You knowingly exaggerated a false accusation because you believed it would get more attention." She shook her head, but weakly now. "You wanted attention," I continued. "You wanted pressure. You wanted parents, neighbors, and the school to react before they understood. You wanted the accusation to spread because the truth was too ordinary to punish Mrs. Bennet the way you wanted." Marlene's eyes filled with tears then, but I did not trust them, not because tears cannot be real. They can, but in that moment, I could not tell whether she was crying because she had hurt Olivia or because she had been caught hurting Olivia. There is a difference. Then Olivia spoke. Her voice was quiet. "I tried to be kind to you." That sentence did more than any accusation could have done. Marlene looked at her. Olivia continued, "I brought you banana bread. Mark moved your planter. I changed my porch light. I kept Pumpkin inside more. I stopped answering your messages because I didn't want to fight, and you still did this." Marlene said nothing. Olivia wiped her face. "You didn't just embarrass me. You made me afraid to go to work. You made parents look at me differently. You made my husband and me fight every night. You trapped my cat and brought him here like he was some object." Pumpkin shifted in the carrier, pressing one paw against the door. Olivia looked toward him, and her voice broke. "He's just a cat." That was the line that finally broke the courtroom, not into noise, into emotion. Because after all the accusations, the clips, the devices, the boxes, the property lines, the posts, and the legal arguments, the truth was painfully simple. Pumpkin was just a cat. Olivia was just a teacher trying to protect herself. Mark was a husband who made one serious mistake out of fear. And Marlene was a woman who had turned suspicion into a weapon. I looked at Marlene and knew the final verdict would have to do more than decide who owed money. It had to draw a boundary, a clear one, because when false accusations are designed to go viral, silence is not enough. The courtroom needed a final word, and Marlene Whitaker needed to hear, in front of everyone, exactly what her evidence had really proven. By the time we reached the final stage of that hearing, the orange tabby cat had stopped being funny to anyone in the room. At the beginning, people had looked at Pumpkin and seen an absurd accusation. A cat as evidence, a cat as a spy, a cat dragged into a courtroom because one neighbor believed another neighbor had trained him to collect secrets. But by the end, Pumpkin had become something else. He had become proof of how far a person will go when suspicion becomes identity. He had become proof that a false story, if repeated loudly enough, can damage real lives. And he had become proof that not every ridiculous accusation is harmless. I looked at Marlene Whitaker, sitting at the plaintiff's table. Her purple blouse was still bright. Her gold earrings still moved when she turned her head, but her confidence had disappeared. The folders she had carried like a weapon now sat partly open, papers spread across the table, every page weaker than when she walked in. She had claimed Pumpkin was surveillance. The court technician proved the black object was not a recorder. She had claimed Olivia Bennet planted evidence near her fence. The full footage showed Olivia placed a documentation box on her own property, and Marlene entered that property at night to take it. She had claimed the cat led her to the hidden box. The full video showed Marlene carried Pumpkin outside herself, placed treats near the fence, and staged the scene. She had claimed she was simply trying to protect her privacy. Her own recorded phone call revealed the truth. Crazy gets attention. That sentence stayed in the room even after the audio ended. Crazy gets attention. I have heard many ugly statements from the bench, but that one disturbed me because it explained the modern danger of a lie. Marlene understood that an ordinary accusation might not travel far. A teacher keeping notes about a hostile neighbor was not dramatic enough. A husband improperly checking a call log was serious, but not strange enough to make strangers click, comment, and share. But a cat being used as a spy, that would spread, that would make people look. That would make Olivia Bennett's name travel farther than the truth ever could. I turned to Marlene and asked one final question. Do you still believe this cat was trained to spy on you? For once, she did not answer quickly. She looked toward Pumpkin's carrier. The cat was awake now, sitting upright, eyes half closed, tail curled against his side. He looked bored, tired, and completely innocent of every theory built around him. Marlene's lips pressed together. Then she said, I believe Olivia was watching me. That was not an answer. It was a retreat. I asked again, do you have any evidence that Pumpkin was trained, equipped, or directed to spy on you? She looked down. No, one word, small, late. But important, Olivia closed her eyes when she heard it. Mark Bennett put one hand on the table and let out a breath, but he did not celebrate. He knew, as I did, that one admission did not undo months of damage. Then I addressed the other truth in the room. Mr. Bennett, I said, you accessed information connected to Ms. Whitaker's emergency call without a proper professional reason. Mark stood slowly. Yes, Your Honor, you were wrong. I know there was no argument in him now, no attempt to justify it through Marlene's behavior. That mattered. Accountability begins when a person stops explaining and starts accepting. I told him the matter would be referred to his employer for review. If there were policy violations or privacy consequences, those would be handled through the proper channels. He nodded, visibly ashamed. Marlene looked up as if she had won something, but she had not, because Mark's mistake did not transform her campaign into truth. It did not make Pumpkin a spy. It did not justify trapping the cat, taking the collar, staging footage, entering Olivia's yard, stealing the documentation box, posting edited clips, or damaging a teacher's reputation. Two wrongs stood in that courtroom, but they were not equal in scale, intent, or effect. I turned back to Marlene M. Whitaker. Your claim for $10,000 is denied. She stiffened. I continued. You failed to prove surveillance. You failed to prove harassment by Mrs. Bennett. You failed to prove the cat was used as evidence against you in any lawful or factual sense. The object you called a recording device was not a recording device. The footage you submitted was edited. The full recording showed you staging the very circumstances you later presented as proof. Her eyes filled, but she did not speak. I was not finished. More importantly, you used edited material to create public suspicion against Mrs. Bennett. You posted claims that reached her school community. You caused her to be questioned professionally over an accusation you knew would sound outrageous enough to attract attention. Your own words show that you understood the power of that accusation. Olivia looked down, tears slipping silently onto her hands. I addressed her next. Mrs. Bennett, the court recognizes that you were subjected to repeated accusations, public embarrassment, and interference with the peaceful use of your home. You had a right to document what was happening. But the court also notes that placing documents outside at night near a disputed neighbor boundary escalated risk. Fear makes people do unusual things, but documentation should be preserved safely, lawfully, and directly. She nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Then I looked at Mark. And your husband's improper access to emergency call information gave Miss Whitaker one real fact to wrap around many false ones. That does not excuse her conduct. But it does show how quickly one bad decision can feed a larger fire. Mark swallowed and nodded again. The courtroom remained silent. I ordered Marlene to pay Olivia Bennett for documented damages connected to the defamatory posts, the cost of replacing Pumpkin's collar and related veterinary check after the trapping incident, and reasonable expenses tied to responding to the false claim. I ordered the return of all documents taken from the metal box and instructed that no copies, images, or posts containing those materials were to remain online. I also referred the matter concerning the late-night entry onto the Bennett property and the trapping of Pumpkin to the appropriate local authorities for further review. Marlene's face tightened. Over a cat. She said that was the wrong thing to say. The room felt it immediately. I leaned forward. No, Miss Whitaker, not over a cat. Over your decision to turn a cat into a weapon against another human being. She looked away, I continued, because the point had to be made clearly. This case was never truly about Pumpkin. It was about boundaries. It was about suspicion. It was about how easily fear can become accusation and how easily accusation can become punishment when someone decides attention matters more than truth. Marlene said nothing. Olivia wiped her face. Pumpkin pressed his paw against the carrier door, and for the first time all morning, a small, quiet smile passed across Olivia's face, not because the case was funny. It was not funny anymore, but because Pumpkin was still Pumpkin. Just a cat, not a spy, not evidence, not an operative, just a pet who wanted to go home. I allowed Olivia to take him from the carrier. She opened the small door carefully, and Pumpkin stepped out slowly, stretched his front legs, then climbed into her arms like none of the human madness around him had ever mattered. Olivia held him against her chest and cried into his fur. Mark stood beside her, one hand hovering near her shoulder, uncertain. Then Olivia leaned slightly toward him, and he placed his hand there. It was a small gesture, but small gestures matter. Sometimes they tell you whether people are ready to repair what fear has damaged. Marlene watched them, and for a moment I thought she might apologize. She did not. Instead, she gathered her papers with stiff, angry movements. That told me she still believed she had been wronged. Some people leave court corrected. Others leave only defeated. Marlene Whitaker, I suspect, belonged to the second group. But the judgment was clear. Her claim was dismissed. Her edited narrative was exposed. Her evidence had proven the opposite of what she intended. And the courtroom, which began the morning wondering whether a cat could somehow be part of a bizarre surveillance plot, ended with the truth no one could ignore. The cat was not evidence against Olivia Bennett. The cat was evidence against Marlene Whitaker. I have thought about that case many times since. Not because it was the strangest file I ever read, though it may have been close. I remember it because it showed how dangerous ridicule can be. At first, the story sounded absurd enough to laugh at, but beneath the absurdity was a teacher humiliated at work, a marriage strained by fear, a pet trapped and used, a neighbor's privacy violated, and an online accusation designed to spread faster than the facts. That is what people forget. A lie does not need to be logical to hurt someone. It only needs an audience. Marlene Whitaker thought the cat would prove her case. She thought Pumpkin would expose Olivia, destroy her reputation, and convince the world that her fears were facts. But in the end, Pumpkin exposed something else entirely. He exposed the danger of a person who needed to be right more than she needed, to be honest. And when I gave the final verdict, no one in that courtroom laughed. Not one person, because by then everyone understood that the silence was not for the cat. It was for the damage a false story had already done.